So that was U.S. President Donald Trump heading into the 2026 FIFA World Cup draw event in Washington, seeming optimistic about a meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. CBC's Katie Simpson was at the event, and she joins me now from Washington. So, Katie, you were at the FIFA draw. I mean, what did you see? It was quite the spectacle with them all gathered there together.
So I couldn't see the start of the show, but I can hear it in my ear. Did you start with the Donald Trump the YMCA dance? Because that sort of was one of the highlights of the whole event. Donald Trump was actually supposed to leave earlier, but it is our understanding from the U.S. pool, the White House reporters, that Donald Trump wanted to stay longer and wanted to have more time watching this event unfold. He was clearly having a really good time. The reason that is so important is because Prime Minister Mark Carney is trying to get some face time with U.S. President Donald Trump when he's in a good mood to try and sort of recalibrate the relationship that has been in a bit of a frosty spot. Frosty is probably the understatement of 2025, but we're in 2025 and, we all just need a drink right now. But that's where we are. But what happened today was we witnessed Donald Trump and Mark Carney. They were actually seated sort of right beside each other. Claudia Sheinbaum kind of snuck in between them at one point. But they were sitting together in this balcony overlooking this grand spectacle, and they were leaning in together, chatting. They looked like old friends that were having a good catch-up. They were laughing. They were joking. There were arm touches, all that kind of body language that signaled there was positive conversation going on right now. Again, that is a very important thing for Canada right now, as Canada very badly needs to get things moving in a better direction. There are two separate issues that Canada is trying to sort of deal with in the immediate right now. One, prevent any sort of harm to CUSMA. The agreement is going to be renewed next year and renegotiated next year. Donald Trump and his top trade official have recently made threats or floated the idea that the United States might exit it. Canada is preparing to deal with that and does not want that to happen. And so that's one area Canada is trying to smooth over. And then you've got the trade negotiations where Canada is trying to get some of the tariffs on like steel, aluminum, autos, wood, you name it, try to get some of those tariffs lifted. Those talks have been going on quite intensively in Washington largely, but they were broken off at the end of October when Donald Trump got mad about that anti-tariff ad that was put out by Ontario Premier Doug Ford. So Mark Carney is trying to sort of make some inroads, make some movement here, and use this exciting, light, entertaining, and really fun event, the world's biggest sporting event, to really sort of maybe have some positive moments with Donald Trump. So we know that we saw them, or I saw them with my own eyes, sitting there, chit-chatting back and forth for the duration of the entire thing. And then they went behind closed doors and had a 45-minute meeting. It was Mark Carney, Claudia Sheinbaum, and Donald Trump. We're told that there was no staff in there. And they sat and had a conversation for about 45 minutes. I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that trade would have come up in that conversation. But again, we're waiting to hear from the Prime Minister's office, from our sources, to just get a better sense of what might have actually been discussed and whether there's something tangible coming out of this at this point. That's going to take some time to learn. The Prime Minister is going to be speaking at a Christmas tree lighting event in Washington in sometime in the next few hours. So maybe he'll say something there, but we don't know just yet. But that's, in terms of if you're just looking at the pictures and you're looking at the body language and how they're interacting, it looks like they're old friends, but they're old friends in the middle of a really, really bitter and devastating trade war. Yeah, no, all smiles, and Mark Carney even wore a red tie, I guess to flatter Donald Trump, because he usually goes with a monochromatic look. But as you say, Katie, no staff at the request of the U.S. is what I am told, which means it's tough to find out exactly what happened. So we haven't heard from the Prime Minister or President Sheinbaum or President Trump. I mean, where do things go now? Where do things go from here in the immediate term? So it's going to be, we have to do the wait and see part of that, which is like the really annoying part of, we're trying to all get the same information. Every single journalist is trying to figure out what happened in the room. But it's going to be moving forward. Is there some sort of momentum that happens here that can lead to sort of a re-sparking of the conversations that were happening weeks ago to try and get some of those tariffs lifted? Now, if that doesn't happen, there are a number of trade experts that happen to be in Washington this week. There have been these high-profile CUSMA or U.S. USMCA hearings where the Trump administration is taking in all these opinions from business leaders, stakeholders, union leaders, all these different people who want to offer their opinion about the three-way trade agreement. And we've been chatting with experts sort of on the sidelines of that. And Steve Verhoeven, who's a name that Canadians may remember, he was the lead negotiator when NAFTA was renegotiated. And I was chatting with him yesterday, and he said, Canada just needs to be patient. The best deal is probably not going to happen right now. And, another thing that's been pointed out, Donald Trump really likes his tariffs. So why is he going to budge? That's the thing right now. So it's just trying to be patient is what the experts are saying in this moment, as all of us wait to see if there is going to be any sort of development movement as a result of this big spectacle. And David, it was a spectacle.
Yeah,
it was a thing.
It sure was, and there's a whole new FIFA Peace Prize apparently. That's another conversation. Katie, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington in a cat-like state of readiness. Okay, so with trade negotiations between the U.S. and Canada still officially on ice, what could today's talks actually accomplish? Jean Charest is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, a former Deputy Prime Minister and a former Premier of Quebec. Mr. Charest, good to see you again. Thanks for being here, sir.
Nice to see you, David.
We know the three leaders met for 45 minutes without staff. That's the intel we have on this. Can we draw anything from that? This was apparently the U.S.'s request that it just be the three leaders.
I like that. By the way, you should know that when leaders meet without staff, the staff get very nervous.
I bet.
What they'll say or commit to. And getting debriefed is always very intense. I think it's good. Relationships count. We know that, David. And with this president, more than anyone else, personal relationships really count. So the three of them together, good. And the only thing that I would add is that Mr. Trump isn't very big on meetings that are not bilateral. He doesn't like family meetings or groupings, but he likes President Sheinbaum. We know that. And we also know he likes Prime Minister Carney. So I would be hopeful that he would have given a few signals that we can move along with these negotiations.
Okay, well, look, what we saw in public as they were all watching the soccer draw and the president was dancing and other things, that all looked very friendly and cordial. I mean, who knows if that continued privately, but other things that the president has said, and Jamieson Greer, the trade representative, has said about walking away from CUSMA, letting CUSMA expire. They've done that before, but that was Trump 1, and Trump 2 is different. I mean, how do you interpret those signals?
I think it's all part of the modus operandi. The bottom line about CUSMA and our situation relative to Europe, relative to Japan, South Korea, is that our supply chains are very intertwined. Undoing CUSMA would be economically painful for the Americans, obviously for us, but it would be painful for them. And I think we're going to get a lot of rhetoric, but at the end of the day, they'll want to maintain it because economically it makes more sense to maintain it. And so, but expect a lot of posturing until we reach the point where we open up on the negotiations.
Yeah, the arguments, the data, they all say keep it together. This was the overwhelming message from business groups, American business groups, testifying at the hearings there this week. But then Jamieson Greer, in that conversation with Politico, he said, NAFTA, it doesn't make a ton of economic sense to have a three-way trade partnership, right? And they seem to have it as an article of faith that bilaterals work better and splitting this up could work better. So, if they believe it in the face of the evidence, what do you do?
What I'm hearing when he says that is that from a negotiating strategy point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be three at the table because they see that as diluting their position. And so we'll use the full power we have in bilaterals. Does it make economic sense to have a trilateral deal between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S.? Overwhelmingly, the answer is yes. Does it make sense that we do? How do we get there is another question. I was in Europe last week, David, and Jamieson Greer was in Europe with Secretary Lutnick, meeting with the Europeans, same type of rhetoric, telling them that they have to do a number of things or else. But what I also saw in Europe was a trade deal that was not aging well. Yeah. And Europeans not very happy and having to get it through their European Parliament, which is not a done deal. So we get a lot of rhetoric. At the end of the day, we have to stay very focused. Of course, for Canada, preserving this trade relationship is the #1 objective we have. I'm confident that if we're patient, don't get distracted, keep our eye on the ball, that we'll get there.
You sound a lot like Steve Verhoeven, who said a very similar thing when he was endorsed.
Steve.
Yeah. But he said the same thing, right? That now is not the time to get a good deal. Wait, right?
No. Well, Steve's point of view is interesting. And he negotiated the Canada-Europe deal and then came in with Kirsten Hillman to negotiate the last NAFTA agreement. So he knows these things. There's two schools of thought out there. One of them is, hey, let's get a deal as rapidly as possible. And they argue that the uncertainty is a tax on our economy, which is true. That's true. And then the other school of thought is keep your cool. And because the deals we can get now are not the deals we want. These are not going to be good deals if we want a deal today. We have to be patient. Other things are going to happen. Remember, the Supreme Court of the United States will render their decision on the IPA legislation. All probabilities are that this will weaken the president's position. And then the midterms are coming up. There may be a switch next November in the midterms, and Congress may reappropriate themselves the trade file if they get a majority, Democrats get a majority. So there is no easy answer or clear answer. I'm more on the side of stay cool and recognize the core interests of the United States, and let's make sure that we don't get distracted and try to engage as much as we can with them.
You know, it's hard to stay cool, though, if you're a steel worker at Algoma and Sault Ste. Marie just lost 1,000 people, lost their jobs, right?
And I couldn't agree with you more.
So, November for the midterms, Mr. Ray, is a long way away, and I know that might not even resolve the sectoral issues because that's being done under a national security provision. That is a different way of putting in a tariff. So, how does that challenge the patience of the Canadian government and the urge to wait and wait and wait, do you think?
Well, let's return to the worker at Algoma who is not feeling very good about his situation today and may not be living in Algoma in a year from now if they look at their future. That's where the government of Canada has to come in, David. That's where the government domestically has to come in to support the industry. It has to support the workers. It has to be there for the people who are going to be affected by this and can't just leave them out there in the cold on their own. And both the provincial and federal governments have to work to support that person. And that, by the way, is a big difference between us and the United States. We have more of an ability and a culture to support people who are affected than the Americans do. And it explains why free trade affected them more negatively in certain communities than it did for us, because at least we did a minimum of effort to help the people who are going to be impacted by this and for whom we feel we should pay it a lot of attention.
I want to, if I can, Mr. Charest, I want to ask you a question about something Stephen Guilbeault said in an interview he did today with my colleague Rosemary Barton. As you know, he resigned from Cabinet over the MOU. Yep. And he said that he thinks the reaction to the Memorandum of Understanding and the rolling back of some of the climate policies is fueling separatism sentiment in Quebec right now. You're a former premier. You were the federal PC leader during the referendum in '95. I mean, do you see that as a consequence in the province of Quebec? I wonder what your thoughts are on that. That essentially he sees the Liberals moving away from climate, and that is an issue that maybe helps the Parti Québécois and the whole notion of separatism in your home province.
I think that comment is premature, and there's evidence out there, according to public opinion research, to the effect that Quebecers and other Canadians support, for example, the construction of pipelines, A. B, what I find interesting about the agreement between Alberta and Ottawa is the design of the program to deal with greenhouse gas emissions. I've been there. By the way, Quebec is the only province who has a carbon trading system as opposed to a carbon tax, which they still have in place. I'm happy to take all the credit for that, David, because it was my government who put it in. And the point I just want to make, which I think Mr. Carney's focused on, if you want the programs that deal with carbon trading and reduction to work, the design is extremely important. If you get the design wrong, you get a bad reaction from public opinion, as you did on the carbon tax. You are not going to be, not only will you not be successful, you're actually going to hurt your own cause. And what I saw in Alberta and in Ottawa is a simplification of the approach to make it workable while going towards the same outcome. So I like Stephen Guilbeault a lot. I have a lot of respect for him, but I think it's early, much too early to say that this agreement will have a negative impact in Quebec. There's a lot more happening in Quebec, believe me, than people paying attention to this agreement.
Right. Well, no, there's big fights over culture. Mark Miller and his comments on being tired of the language debate. And I mean, I wonder, just all of that, plus the resignation of Stephen Guilbeault, what is that doing for the federal Liberals in Quebec? I mean, 44 of the seats there last time, and questions even in their own ranks about whether they could sustain that based on some of these other developments. Just your thoughts on that?
Well, let's start with the beginning. All these seats are there in Quebec because Mark Carney was the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, and he's succeeded in getting them elected. And in our political system, the leader weighs very heavily in regards to either success or defeat. And so they know that. He is very respected here, Prime Minister Carney, and he'll face all the issues out there. But on the overall things that he's doing and direction of his government, I think people are satisfied with what he's doing. They're following what he's doing, and I don't get a sense right now that has changed a lot. Of course, people would like to have a trade deal, but even public opinion, David, on the trade deal, people understand. They see Donald Trump every day. I mean, we know what we're up against. And so there is a certain level of confidence that this prime minister is having to do the changes that the country needs to have. And we're not going to, none of them are going to be easy. But if we're going to change our country to be more competitive, we're going to have to do things like what Prime Minister Carney did with Premier Smith in Alberta.
Jean Charest, we always appreciate the time. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, David.